President Biden is making his way back to the U.S. after a historic summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The two leaders sat down for about 3 hours and discussed a variety of topics, ranging from human rights to nuclear arms control and cybersecurity. It comes on the heels of two major ransomware attacks against critical U.S. infrastructure carried out by hackers with ties to Russia. President Biden said he made it clear to Russia's leader that there would be consequences if there are future attacks. Despite some tense subjects, the two presidents described their meeting as positive and constructive. But it remains to be seen if this summit will improve relations between the U.S. and Russia. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes has more from Geneva.
I did what I came to do.
The surprisingly cordial summit started with pleasantries and a handshake and ended with praise from Putin.
I would say he is very constructive. He is very balanced.
The tensest moments involved reporters and Russian security.
Stop pushing!
The two leaders and a handful of aides plowed through a long list of disputes, starting with cybersecurity.
I told President Putin that we need to have some basic rules of the road that we can all abide by.
In the wake of crippling ransomware attacks on U.S. businesses, Mr. Biden gave Putin a list of 16 critical infrastructure sectors, including energy and water systems, that need to be off limits to Russian hackers.
If in fact they violate these basic norms, we will respond. Cyber. He knows.
Putin agreed to work with the president.
I think that's extremely important.
But he also claimed most hackers are in the U.S.
What does the state of Russia have to do with that?
President Biden also pushed Putin to release two former Marines imprisoned in Russia.
I pointed out, you want to get American business to invest, let them go. Change the dynamic. Because American businessmen, we're ready to show up. They don't want to hang around in Moscow.
Putin sounded positive.
We discussed that. There could be some compromise that we enter into.
Russia expert Fiona Hill attended President Trump's summit with Putin. Was this a different Vladimir Putin in any way than the one you saw in Helsinki in 2018?
He was a lot less cavalier, and he did seem that he was genuinely trying to move the dial forward somewhat to next set of meetings.
But she notes he's broken promises many times before. President Biden said the true test will come in 3 to 6 months.
I'm not sitting here saying because the president and I agreed that we would do these things that all of a sudden it's going to work. I'm not saying that.
He grew testy when asked if he was too optimistic.
Why are you so confident he'll change his behavior, Mr. President?
Yeah, I'm not confident he'll change behavior. What do you do over there? When did I say I was confident? You don't understand that in your own business.
By the time he got to the airport, he had cooled off.
I owe my last question an apology. I shouldn't have been such a wise guy with the last answer I gave.
During Wednesday's summit, President Biden made it clear that the U.S. can and will retaliate against future cyber attacks linked to Russia. The question is, how will Russia's president respond? CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe continues our coverage from Geneva.
In conceding today that cyber war is here to stay, President Biden said he and Russian President Putin are seeking to place limits on future battles. And he issued Putin a warning.
He knows there are consequences.
Ransomware attacks on the Colonial Pipeline and the JBS Meat Processing Company were believed to be carried out by two Russian-based criminal groups, DarkSide and R-Evil, with both companies paying the attackers millions of dollars. These episodes put cyber warfare near the top of the president's agenda today and prompted him to ask Putin how he'd respond if a U.S.-based hacker took out one of his critical oil and gas pipelines.
What happens if that ransomware outfit were sitting in Florida or Maine and took action, as I said, on their single lifeline to their economy, oil? It'd be devastating. And they're like, you could see them kind of go, not we'd do that, but like, whoa.
Despite that apparent reaction, Putin's continued denial of any responsibility suggests he may not be willing to rein in the hackers within his borders. And today, he argued without evidence that the U.S. is the bigger perpetrator of cyber attacks.
We see that this work is being coordinated from the cyber realm of the United States.
Former CIA Acting Director Mike Morrell said despite today's summit and President Biden's optimism, it's unlikely the attacks will stop.
Many of the individuals who are doing the hacking are Russian intelligence officers who do national security espionage during the day, and they work for organized crime at night. So this is a very difficult thing for Putin to take action against.
Ed O'Keefe joins me now from Geneva. Ed, good to see you. So both presidents said that their talks were constructive. Was this as expected? And do you believe that there was actually real progress made in addressing any of those issues between the U.S. and Russia?
Notable that they were both so optimistic and in many ways saying much of the same things, that they had constructive conversations about nuclear arms control, cybersecurity, disagreements about things like Ukraine. I think we won't really know whether this was successful or not until, as the president said, 6 months from now, a year from now, if these talks that happen at a lower level actually yield any progress. For example, on the issue of cybersecurity, the fact that they got specific, talking about potential, guardrails on where exactly cyber war should and could happen and could not happen, and what might spark an American response is I think, a really notable signal and moment in history where basically the leaders of the two countries that are capable of doing this, or two of the countries that are capable of doing this, essentially admitting this is a warfare that now exists. It's going to continue, but we're going to try to put some limits on what's acceptable.
So optimistic, constructive, but not confident. And why did the president seem to get so upset at that question, the suggestion that he was confident?
Well, first of all, he didn't ever use that word. And second, I think there were a lot of factors at play. We're at the end of an 8-day trip that has seen, frankly, record temperatures across the two European cities that this Biden world tour has been through. He's had long nights and days. And frankly, what people saw there in reaction to that question is something that we know staffers occasionally see from him. Quick snaps of anger or frustration that include a little yelling and perhaps some words used that he later regrets. And he's been known to apologize to people privately. In this case, he felt compelled to do it so publicly. And just a few minutes after it happened, probably realizing as he got in the car that he'd gone too far and wanted to clarify his comments. There seemed to be some frustration in him as we watched him throughout the day, I think partly because he wasn't a huge fan of the questions and the format he was getting. Also, and Lana, I know people at home may think this is silly, but where he was standing, it was an incredibly hot and sunny set of minutes that he was standing there. And the way the stage was set up, the sun was literally on his back. And I imagine after as many hours as he was in that meeting with the Russian president, the fact that he, like a lot of us, are a bit drawn out by all this, it may have just gotten to him. But that is a part of the president that is known to exist, and it's one that sort of showed itself today. This reporter and others have gotten it in the past, and it's just part of the way he reacts. But look, it was a question that is probably worth asking, even though it wasn't quite the wording that he had used. And when you ask tough questions of world leaders, you sometimes get interesting responses, as we did today.
Very, very helpful context, Ed. So let's get back to the question about cyber attacks, because President Biden listed 16 critical infrastructure sectors that he says are off limits to attacks. As you explained, he really phrased it in a way that illustrated that the U.S. was going to consider this as cyber warfare and make sure that the Russian leader also understood it that way. So what more can you tell us about what's on the list? And what do you make of President Putin's response, sort of throwing it back and saying, well, really, it's coming from the U.S., most of the hacking?
Well, that's what causes so much concern for experts who track cybersecurity and track Russia, is that if he can't even publicly acknowledge that he's got a problem in his own country and he's going to look into it, then what's to say that he's going to allow this or try to stop it from continuing? So that's part of the concern, and that's very consistent with how he's discussed this issue and others in recent years, according to those that follow it very closely. The 16 infrastructure sectors that he presented to the Russian president actually come from a Department of Homeland Security list, and they include everything from chemical plants to water treatment plants and water systems, airports, subways, the postal service, government buildings and computer networks, schools. Essentially, it doesn't leave much there to actually be hacked. And I think that's the point. They're trying to say, look, there are a lot of different entities that are clearly targets and potentially vulnerable to these kinds of attacks, but in the view of the administration and the federal government are considered off limits at this point. So he's now presented this list. Banks, other entities like that, and said, this to us is off limits. Putin said, I'll take a look at the list, we'll see, but then said without proof that the U.S. is the one that actually does this more often. And so it's going to be interesting to see, as senior government officials get together in both countries, where there might be areas of agreement as those talks begin, whenever they begin.
And Ed, as you reported, President Biden said that he made it clear that there would be consequences for further cyber attacks. He also said that there'd be consequences if Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny dies in prison. But is the promise of consequences likely to have an impact on Putin's actions?
Most that track this more closely say no, because these kinds of things have been said before, and then something happens to those kinds of people. And it was notable today in his press conference, he won't even say Navalny's name. He raised a lot of concerns about whether Navalny had purposely set himself up to get arrested and had taken interesting actions. That is not the view of those that work with Navalny, those that track the case closely. So it was telling, but also notable that he took several questions on this issue specifically on the world stage, knowing full well that some of this, at least, was probably likely to get back to the Russian public. And so, he took on a sensitive matter, at least to the rest of the world, and tried to minimize it to some extent. Also notable, when he was asked later about sort of political opposition generally, that he turned it around, as he is known to do, and said, look at what happened in your country on January 6th. We're sympathetic to the United States that there was that kind of an attack, that hundreds have been arrested, that one woman was killed. And we don't want that kind of thing to happen in Russia. In essence, saying we do this to avoid having a January 6th happen. That's an interesting argument, and the president batted it away as a sign of Putin's inability to really understand what's going on in the United States.
Well, finally, Ed, during his press conference, President Putin tried to sidestep questions about the situation in Ukraine. We know it came up in their discussion, but do we know more about what was discussed?
We don't really, and the U.S. president acknowledged it's a pretty sensitive subject, and one that was a little harder to discuss. This is something that's come up a few times in his meetings this week with the EU, with NATO, and with the G7, because there's big concern that if Russia goes any further into Ukraine, tries to take over more of its territory, it could spark a real significant war right there in Europe. So it sounded like on this one, for now at least, they agree to disagree. And they're both cited what's called the Minsk Agreement from 2014 that essentially set in place a cessation of hostilities, even though there's clearly still a ground war going on, as our Holly Williams this week pointed out in her reporting from Ukraine. So that seemed to be a little more of a sticky wicket, and one that obviously both sides are going to have to keep talking about.
A highly anticipated meeting. Ed, thank you for joining us to break it all down. Appreciate it.
Take care.